Louise is a single mother who feels lonely after her divorce and only lives with her child. One night she had plans to meet her friend, but her friend suddenly canceled. Feeling alone, Louise decided to go home. Just as she was about to leave, she accidentally spilled her drink on a man there. Because of this, Louise started talking and joking with the man. It turned out that he had also come to the bar alone because he had just moved to the city. They chatted late into the night. As they were about to leave, the man kissed Louise, although he seemed to regret it afterward. The next morning, Louise went to work as usual, but was shocked to find out that the man from last night was her new boss named David, who had just been transferred to the city. To make matters worse, he was married. Panicking, Louise hid in the bathroom and didn't meet David that day. Meanwhile, when David was about to leave for work, it was revealed that his wife Adele took a lot of medication. All of this was managed by David because he was a psychiatrist. So before leaving for work, David had to ensure that Adele had taken her medication. Flashback to the past, it turned out that Adele had been placed in a rehabilitation center. There, she had a friend named Rob who had sleep disorders and drug problems. Adele was there because her parents had died in a fire, and she survived thanks to David who saved her. They were quite close because Rob and Adele had known each other before, even though Rob knew that Adele had a boyfriend, David. Back to Louise's life today, she couldn't avoid meeting David any longer. David was shocked to see Louise in his office. Confused, Louise quickly explained that what happened that night was because they were both drunk and hoped they could forget it and pretend it never happened. She also promised not to tell anyone. However, sleep problems were quite disturbing for Louise because she often had nightmares and experienced sleepwalking. One morning, while taking her child to school, she accidentally bumped into a woman who turned out to be Adele, David's wife. From this incident, Louise got to know Adele without David's knowledge. Long story short, Louise and Adele became quite close. They often went out together and shared stories with each other. Even when Louise had sleep problems, Adele gave her Rob's notebook, believing that if Louise read it, her sleep issues would be resolved. But all of this was without David's knowledge. At night, Louise started reading Rob's notebook that Adele had given her. In the book, the first page contained methods Rob used to sleep better. On the next pages, there were Rob's daily notes. Before she could finish reading, Louise was startled by the sound of her apartment doorbell. It turned out to be David. David excused himself by saying he was just passing by and wanted to check on Louise's health because she didn't go to work. When allowed into her apartment, they began talking about their first meeting at the bar. Not wanting to get emotional, Louise told David to go home. But just as he reached the door, instead of leaving, David started kissing Louise, marking the beginning of their affair, which continued repeatedly. On the other hand, Adele often asked Louise to meet up because Adele felt lonely. Louise was the only friend she could go out with in this city. Louise found herself in a dilemma. On one hand, Adele was very kind to her, but on the other, Louise found it hard to let go of David. One night, while Louise was sleeping and having another nightmare, she started to be able to control it. It turned out that what she had read from Rob's notes actually worked. Meanwhile, one night, David's home phone rang. When he answered, it was a call from Adele's gym asking about renewing her membership. David heard Louise's name and was shocked. He then realized that Adele and Louise had known each other all along. In a fit of rage, David immediately confronted Louise, ordering her to resign and stay away from him and Adele. After resigning from her job, Louise went to see Adele at her home. Louise actually wanted to confess her affair with David, but she held back, seeing Adele's weak condition. It turned out that Adele had been given tranquilizers by David all this time. Adele also shared that before they moved to this city, David had actually been caught cheating on her. Louise suggested that Adele leave David, but Adele couldn't because David had all her past records and she would be deemed insane, especially with all the medication she was taking now. And since David was a psychiatrist, he would be more trusted. Hearing Adele's statement, Louise, who still had the key to her old office, tried to retrieve the files kept in David's office. She immediately took and gave them to Adele, hoping she would feel more at ease. Then Adele told Louise something shocking. Adele believed that Rob might have been killed by David out of jealousy. Since one morning David said Rob had left, to this day Adele had never seen Rob again. At night, Louise tried reading Rob's notebook again. but she fell asleep midway through reading. As she slept, Louise had pleasant dreams because she could now control her dreams after following the instructions from Rob's notebook. But this time, something was different. When she entered a door in her dream, suddenly her soul seemed to leave her body, and she could see everything around her in reality. Louise was shocked when she woke up and realized that everything she had seen was actually happening. Flashback to the past. When Rob and Adele had already left rehab, Rob went to Adele's grand house. Adele was born into a wealthy family and now lived alone, while waiting for David to come over, accompanied by Rob. At night, Adele taught Rob how to perform astral projection. And also the fire tragedy happened when Adele was doing astral projection, and that afternoon David arrived at Adele's place. She immediately introduced Rob to David. Back to Louise. After experiencing her first astral projection, the next night Louise experienced it again. This time her soul traveled further, so much so that her child was shocked because it was hard to wake her up. This incident made Louise realize that while she was dreaming, she could go and see anything she wanted. Louise recalled the previous incident when it was hard to wake Adele. It was exactly like her current situation. So if Adele could do astral projection, it meant she must have known about Louise's affair with David. It seemed like their meeting was planned by Adele from the start. Still curious about all this, Louise remembered Adele's story about David's affair in Brighton, the city he lived in before moving here. She went to find Marianne, the cafe owner Adele had mentioned. From Marianne, Louise received a very different explanation because David had never had an affair. David only liked going to Marianne's cafe and talking about Adele's behavior. But it was Adele who had terrorized Marianne, even forcing her way into her house. It was David who asked Marianne not to sue Adele and promised to leave the city. Upon returning from Brighton, Louise tried to contact David and asked to meet him. Disguising her name as Marianne over the phone, David came to meet her immediately. When they met, Louise asked David if Rob had died and if he had killed him. David began explaining the situation. It was true that Rob had died, but he had overdosed on drugs, and Adele had thrown his body into a well. David's watch also fell into the well. That was Adele's threat to David all this time if he ever tried to leave her. But it seemed David was tired of all this. He told Louise to stay away, and that he would go to the police to tell the truth. Louise returned to her home. Shortly after, Adele called. From the conversation, Adele learned that David had gone to the police station to tell the truth about Rob. Hearing this, Adele became very angry and eventually decided to commit suicide, leaving a note explaining everything. Adele also sent a message to Louise saying that she would end it all. Receiving the message, Louise rushed to Adele's house. Adele started burning her own house and injecting herself with heroin. When Louise arrived there, she tried to break down the door but failed. With no other option, Louise used astral projection, allowing her soul to leave her body and enter the house. Louise's soul entered Adele's body, and Adele entered Louise's body instead. So they ended up switching bodies. When Louise woke up in Adele's body, she was shocked to see her own body, now inhabited by Adele. Adele, now in Louise's body, tried to inject more heroin into Louise's body to kill her. Louise couldn't do anything because when she entered Adele's body, the heroin had already been injected. Eventually, Louise died in Adele's body, and now Adele was in Louise's body. It is then revealed, actually, Rob had previously switched bodies with Adele. At that time, Rob had suggested to Adele to try switching bodies just for fun, but Rob had other plans. After they switched bodies, Rob killed Adele because Rob was gay and truly loved David. And this was the only way Rob could be with David. Finally, David remarried Louise, but it was actually still Rob in Louise's body. And the movie ends. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. Because by subscribing, you have supported me to make better videos. See you in the next video.